A very good evening to you and welcome to this week's Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. A few days ago, none of us would have predicted such a catastrophic disaster. Marauding gangs of looters breaking every door, every gate, tearing down any wall that stands between them and taking what's not theirs. At least 45 people have died in the hotspot provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Over 800 have been arrested, and between 10 and 12 people of interest are on the police radar, possibly including former President Jacob Zuma's children, for inciting violence that has resulted in a carnage never seen before in the history of our democracy. Despite evidence to the contrary, police, army and intelligence services head honchos insist they are on top of things, with 2,500 army personnel sent in to protect life and property and to assist the tens of thousands of members of the SA Police Service, some of whom had been taken off desk duties or called back from leave. And on the show this evening, we speak to the minister who says they've done everything they could to help other departments deal effectively with the crisis. And that's Intelligence Minister Ayanda Dlodlo. But not before our panel for this evening looks at what possibly went wrong and how we urgently, or what we can do to urgently fix the problems that we are seeing. The Watchdog starts now.
And I'd like to be clear, we will take action to protect every person in this country against the threat of violence, intimidation, theft and looting. We will not hesitate to arrest and prosecute those who perpetrate these actions and will ensure that they face the full might of our law.
And the response from the looters: we dare you.
We are not going to surrender right now. We are going to mobilize more.
Tonight on the program, we'll take a step or two back to look at what may have brought us here and see whether there's a way to not let this crisis go to waste. To help us do exactly that, let's welcome Dr. Seth Cooper, who is a psychologist and an activist who spent 9 years on Robben Island. Mweleth Mbeki is an economist, businessman and political commentator who spent years in exile before his return to South Africa. And Dr. Padil Hohla is the country's immediate past statistician general who now spends his retirement time pondering the sorts of questions preoccupying South Africans' minds at this hour. Welcome to all three of you, gentlemen, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on the program. And I'll start with you, Ntatel Hohla. Just your thoughts, what we've been saying, especially over the past couple of days.
Well, I think it's a very, it's a depressing situation. I witnessed this in 1994 in Mabato when Mamope collapsed, where looting and burning of property occurred. And it does happen when there is intransigence, that it goes to the wire, and some things like this do happen. Would it have been avoidable? Probably. Now it hasn't been avoidable, and we are in this. Therefore, we have to see what the future may hold. Can it be resolved now? Perhaps, but it has its seeds very deep in our systems, and therefore it requires a long-term vision, a long-term solution, and we need to put and lift our gaze to that point where those things should happen, and we have to put bridges for that.
Mr. Mbeki?
But it's a very devastating situation.
Okay. Mr. Mbeki, your thoughts?
Well, really, it is a huge shock to the country. It's a huge shock to me. I'm really shocked to see that just to put Jacob Zuma to prison by the Constitutional Court. 45 of my fellow citizens have died already, and our economy is on the verge, is in tatters, all for the sake of putting Jacob Zuma to prison. Now I ask myself, why is it so important to have Jacob Zuma in prison? Is imprisoning Jacob Zuma worth the lives of 45 South Africans? Is it worth the destruction of our economy? Is it worth the destruction of the Southern African economy? You know, when you close down the N3, which goes all the way from the Copper Belt in Lubumbashi, it is the core artery of the economy of Southern Africa. Is it worth having Jacob Zuma in prison? Do the lawyers think this is the cost that we should pay as a people, as a country, as a region of Southern Africa, for them to be able to quote some Western textbook and tell us, oh, we have obeyed the rule of law? Is this what our lawyers study at these universities? That to follow the rule of law, we have to kill 45 people, we have to destroy the economy of South Africa and to put the economy of Southern Africa on the edge of destruction? Well, for me, it isn't. They can read whatever many Western textbooks they like. Rule of law is not worth the lives. Whatever the Western principles are about the rule of law, it's not worth the lives of 45 South Africans. It's not worth destroying the economy of South Africa, and it is not worth destroying the economy of Southern Africa.
Dr. Sas Cooper?
I think that the problem is bigger than Jacob Zuma. I think we have seen the signs, but we've refused to recognize them. I think it's about failure in our system, failure in democracy to be beneficial to the majority of our people. What we've seen, of course, causes all of us great consternation. But that's merely the symptom of a bigger problem, and that is the marginalization, completely cutting off the majority of our people from democratic processes. They have lost faith in this system. You know, previously we talked of the apartheid system. Now we have become the system, alienating, blaming, and labeling people who are responding out of a situation of wretchedness. And we've been bereft of credible, able, committed leadership to take us beyond the narrow party and other rhetoric. And I ask myself what I would do if I were part of that majority. The median age in our country is in the late 20s. What I would do if I'm out of work, out of school, and all around me there is desolation, compounded by a pandemic so terribly handled that the spark gets lit, the voices are out there in support of one person, and the genies, multiple genies, are let out of the bottle. That's what we're dealing with here. So let's not blame people who are responding to a situation of destitution, serious defeat, because we have failed them. And I think we now need to look at why are we adopting the narrow law and order message instead of showing understanding, compassion. What we simply doing is persisting with the denialism of that reality. And all the signs have been there for a long, long time, decades old, predating Jacob Zuma. And dare I say, unless we deal with it constructively and immediately, not with mixed messages coming from different persons in government, we are going to have a failed state. And unfortunately, we'll have to ask for help to restore any sense of credibility in our country, because our current forces seem completely unable to do so. And law and order is being taken over by little gangs out there. Apartheid geography is working, and people are armed, heavily armed, and are killing randomly. So this is a very serious indictment on all of us, because we now are that system that is denying the majority their place in the sun. And therefore, they are going on the rampage because of that pent-up fury.
Dr. Al-Hosha, I mean, for years, you kept churning out these numbers, and the numbers have been pointing to what Dr. Cooper has just described. What happened? Why, in your view, was nothing done? Was it deliberate, or was someone sleeping on the job?
I think it consists of three things. When you get advice and you don't heed it, then there's deliberateness in that. But it was compounded by ignorance and arrogance, because all the time there was always the search for a good story to tell, when the numbers were not telling any good story at all. And we went deeper into analyzing these numbers to show that this is a time bomb affecting the youth. In fact, between 2008 and 2018, the youth have been losing their share of employment, both in absolute numbers as well as proportionate. And in 2016, I presented these results at Cabinet to illustrate that the mother cat has started eating the kittens. At the time, there was a drought, and they started thinking about it is drought, it is this. I said, it is not drought. This is going to bite us. One of the things that also came out of the numbers was the lack of prioritization of education by society. When we went into the public to find out what are the priorities, it was water, sanitation, and so on and so on, but not education. Education came at number 15. And therefore, we are culpable to have allowed the politicians not to advocate for education, but to advocate for those things, important as they are. One of the biggest problems, which was a build-up from 1976, which was 2016 fees must fall, a movement by the students defining for them what futures they wish to have, was destroyed by politicians. And none of the gains were made by the students in relation to the fees must fall. Politicians, ANC, EFF, DA went there to confuse the movement of students, which was a continuation of 1976, and destroyed that organic unity among students to try and resolve, or at least articulate, what futures they think about South Africa. We are now here, and we have to think about, are we the relevant people to talk about the future? Or should we allow the fees must fall movements to determine that future? That's the question.
Mr. Mbeki, I mean, what would force a government to look for a good story to tell when what should be its priorities are so obvious?
Well, we have a new middle-class government, let me tell you. This we have to speak truth to each other. We have a new black middle-class government which lacks confidence. It doesn't have confidence in itself. It doesn't have confidence in black people. least of all in African people. So it is looking for a fantasy world that exists nowhere. So it thinks, instead of building step by step, brick by brick until you get to the roof, it thinks there is a miracle cure. It makes up for its lack of confidence by wanting to have a good story to tell. There is no such a thing as a good story to tell. There is a good building process to work with. And if you start building and you bring your wall up to the level of the window, then you are making progress. But you haven't finished building the house. So you don't have a good story to tell about housing. And this is one of our biggest crises in this country. I have actually phoned Sas Cooper, who's a psychologist, to try and get him to help me understand the psychology of this government. But that is one of its psychologies. It is this middle-class government which has a massive inferiority complex, which is why it accepts gifts like black economic empowerment. These are gifts given to them by white businessmen. They are so proud to be given these gifts because they don't have the dignity and the willingness to build themselves, to build their own wealth if they want to be wealthy, or to build their careers and their professions if they want to be professional. That is one of the biggest challenges. Now, they don't have dignity for themselves and they have contempt for the poor African people. So what do they do for the poor African people? They give them crumbs, they give them charity, which they call social grants. So when you don't have dignity, you don't have self-respect. And I don't want to go this further, given that my fellow panelist is a highly qualified psychologist.
Well, let's ask.
I leave that to him to.
Let's ask the psychologist among us why a new government that has been given, and especially right at the beginning, that was given an overwhelming mandate, would suddenly feel, lack confidence. As Mr. Mbeki says, would suddenly want to find a fantasy world within which to live when you've been given an opportunity to start from scratch. I don't think people are too fantastically unrealistic to not know or give people the benefit of a doubt that, hundreds of years, of colonial rule can't be undone overnight. But they do expect a government to do everything it can with the resources at its disposal. And they are able to judge whether, in fact, their government is doing that or not.
Well, I think, first of all, it is not a new government. 27 years in consistent power in anybody's book is not new. However, at the dawn of democracy, with the exception of certain significant figures led by founding President Mandela, and it's very significant that actually the anniversary of his birthday is this weekend. And this is supposed to be Mandela's month. We are actually desecrating all that brought us here through callousness, through being removed from ordinary people's plight, from actually marooning ourselves by walls of the mind and physical walls from our people. When we live in these palaces on the top of a hill, and around us there are shacks, how do we think that value of this castle will be? And do we not see this discontent? This winter of discontent is all around us. We see it on the streets. We see it in little towns. We see the bulk of people, young people, just idle. They have been removed from systems. They don't feel part of anything. Indeed, belief, and we're a very religious country, overwhelmingly Christian, but even the church, I dare say, has failed in these times to make those connections. So what about democracy? And what about justice, where people have actually felt there's no justice for us, it's just for them, us here on this panel and an elite listening to us. We've become that system that simply feel entitled. And at the dawn of democracy, with the exception of a few key cabinet ministers and national leaders, I don't think we had the ability to think that we are full human beings. We had half human beings going into government. And the result is we've seen children dying in pit toilets and very little done besides the usual shibboleths. And because it is African life, it's become so cheap. We take it for granted. And right now, the people on the receiving end are those we look at already with diminished perspective. So there is a certain, in classic Black consciousness language, I would call it non-whiteism, where white is the epitome of all success and having arrived, and anything detracting from that is that negative, the non. And when you remove white from that term non-white, you are left with non, nihil, nothing, a non-entity. And that is how key people in government still think of themselves as non-somebody else. So that's part of the problem. And while this pandemic has been raging, for instance, people in government, politicians and civil servants, to a person, have been getting full checks at our expense. Nobody has taken a cut from the top office down. Nobody has taken a cut that we're aware of. And ordinary people have been given 350 Rand food parcels, which politicians and others have stolen. So how do you think ordinary people will relate to this? They see me driving a car which I got from a tender, and I've braided it out there, and there, but for the grace of, go the rest of us. So we need to really rethink the entire democratic experience here, because while we talk of law and order and justice, which I think many of us have respect for, what justice is there? What law is there protecting those people that we make them?
Dadal Husha, now right at the beginning, you spoke about intransigence, which presumably is what made those who were in charge, to not see the obvious. Unpack that for us and tell us how exactly it manifested itself, number one, and two, what it did to make those in power to not see the most obvious things that they ought to have seen.
I think one doesn't have to look far. From about 2010, and particularly from 2012, the African National Congress, the NEC, has been in reflection, deep reflection, introspection. And each one of those introspections up to the last NEC has never actually produced any policy process or policy document or policy that is implementable, that delivers anything except fighting amongst themselves. That intransigence has marked the entire period from about 2009 to now. And it is exploding in our faces. Now, what do we do at the public service level? The plans, the NDP, which was a fairly good document, at least it had some targets. It didn't translate into a plan that is implementable. with resources and everything, was abandoned. Now, we are actually a rudderless society at the moment. The period 2003 to 2008 was guided by what we call scenarios. And I think in all respects, those scenarios were guiding us as to where we are headed. By 2008, all those were abandoned. So where you don't have a scenario process to look at where you are going towards and what you have to avoid, where you don't have a plan that helps you to get where you wish to get, where you don't have the technical ability to read the numbers and read the signs, or being intransigent and not looking at them, where you find yourself talking about we will get investments, which actually they don't reflect in the numbers. I mean, capital formation has not reflected in the numbers. In fact, it has been declining throughout. And gross capital formation is the basis for mainly creating jobs, creating the necessary capital. If it is not there, you know that you are heading for trouble. And there hasn't been any meaningful process to try and look at those kinds of aspects of our economic life to do the right things. What has been hankering around, including in our election cycles, has been about a good story to tell. And there was never a good story to tell. I mean, take, for instance, the 350,000 jobs that have been created for so-called teaching assistants. I mean, it really shows lack of imagination. That in a weak education system, you bring matriculants to come and help teachers. You are aware of a pandemic, and this pandemic eats on us daily. The schools close and open. You cannot bring 350,000 people in that fragile system. It will break. And God knows how those were recruited when we are so damned with corruption. There would have been an alternative. I'm not against getting 350,000 to work. I would prefer 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. But you actually have to prioritize to what end are you bringing these people to do what they do. To bring them in education, it's a disaster in the making. And of course, it is an insult to blacks to bring somebody who is as raw as a kids police in apartheid into a classroom to try and help a teacher. It's a burden to manage that person. It's a burden to try and manage education. It's a burden to try and manage and then we stand with our faces high up to say we have recruited 350,000 people and we are dealing with this joblessness. It is not the right strategy. I think it shows the inability to think and think properly, particularly where it counts the most, which is education.
Now, let's think properly then, Mr. Mbeki. If there's no plan, we're as rudderless, as Dr. Lehohla says, there's lack of imagination, we obviously can't, throw our hands up in the air and say, well, there's nothing that we can do. Where do we begin?
Well, we begin by understanding that 1994 was not the end of history. South Africa had hundreds of years of history before 1994, and it is going to have another hundreds years of history after 1994. So that is the first thing that we all have to understand. The second thing we have to understand is that South Africa is part of Africa. Our historical experience is similar to the historical experiences of other Africans on the African continent. Why is this important? It's important because when we look at the ANC, which is the Party of Liberation, we have to ask ourselves, what happened to other African parties of liberation? What happened to the Convention People's Party in Ghana, which was Nkrumah's party? What happened to the Kenya African National Union, which was Jomo Kenyatta's party? What happened to Malawi Congress Party, which was Kamuzu Banda's party? Recently, the great Kenneth Kaunda died, but you have to ask yourself, what happened to the United National Independence Party of Kaunda? Why are they no longer in existence? They don't exist anymore. Even our own first nationalist party, which to get into government, which was the Afrikaner National Party. Where is the Africa? It was a nationalist movement against British colonialism. Where is it today? It's disappeared. Now, why have liberation movements in South Africa disappeared? Last week, China was celebrating 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party went through hell during the last 100 years. In the hands of the Kuomintang, in the hands of the Americans, in the hands of the Western powers, in the hands of the Chinese landowners. But today, China is number 2 economy in the world, and the Chinese Communist Party has 91 million members. And China is intact and is making progress. Our own liberation parties have disappeared, but the Chinese Communist Party has survived. Now we have to ask ourselves, what happened? Well, what happened is that the Chinese, although they made huge mistakes, they tried to sort out the economic welfare of the people of China. And eventually they found the right formula in 1979. After many failed formulas, but the failed formulas of China failed in good faith. The Great Leap Forward, the 100 Flowers Bloom movement, they were trying to advance the interests of the Chinese people. And they failed, they led to famine, they led to lots of death. But the population understood these people were trying to find a solution for. And eventually they found the solution. What they call in China the 4 modernizations that Deng Xiaoping came out with: modernize agriculture, modernize industry, modernize science and technology, and modernize defense. That was what Deng Xiaoping came up with. After all the experience, he distilled it to the 4 modernizations. What happened to the liberation movements of Africa? Ironically, the South African Communist Party is probably the same age. In fact, I think it is the same age as the Chinese Communist Party. Where is their liberation? So why did they fail? Because they really were fighting for themselves. They were not fighting for the well-being of the people. So they were never interested in solving the issues of education, in solving the issues of economic development, in solving the issues of agriculture. You know, I lived in Tanzania for 3 years, and I was shocked. The basic agricultural instruments in Tanzania when I lived there between 1972 and 1975 was the hoe. I asked the Tanzanians, why don't you have ox-drawn implements? You are still using the hoe. Oh, they said, we tried. So you tried, what happened? Oh, they set up a college to train oxen to pull a plow. They said they brought somebody from Swaziland to come and train them. But the long and the short, basic technology of Tanzania was the hoe. The hoe is thousands of years old. You can't modernize agriculture with a hoe. Go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia was never even colonized. Mm-hmm. If you look at the plow that the Ethiopians use, you will find a painting of it in the tomb of Ramesses III in the Valley of Kings in Egypt. That is the technology that they are still using in Ethiopia, which is a wooden plow with a little metal tip at the end. So what is the way forward? The way forward is that we must realize when a system fails, it fails. It must be replaced. Our liberation parties in Africa are failing, have failed. The ANC is part of that generation. It has failed us. How many people are being killed by the ANC government? We had 34 of them killed in Marikana. We now have 45 people dead in South Africa on the watch of this government. We have communal violence starting to re-emerge in South Africa when we had gotten rid of such things. So we have to realize that there is a way forward, and there are ways forward. But clinging on to old slogans and old ways of looking at things will not help us. Clinging on to history, which may have been glorious in the past, it is no longer glorious. Then you have to move on and leave that behind.
Well, Dr. Cooper, it looks like, we are going to be with the ANC for quite a bit. The scenario of what Mr. Mbeki has just described should be concerning, because what does it do to someone who recognizes the fact that they have to change, but simply does not know how, or doesn't make it their priority because, as he has just said, they are thinking of other things. They were in it for different reasons completely. What does that do to someone? Can someone like that then be trusted to bring about the requisite change?
The short answer is no. However, we should not give up with the people who are entrusted, who have been elected. And I think the first step is for all of them to acknowledge the failure, acknowledge the deep divisions created over 27 years, increasingly in the gap where people have fallen out into a huge underclass that we now just call looters and so on. You see, we need to actually speak to people as people, and that'll come from self-respect. And I think many people in positions of authority lack that. They lack a sense of agency because in some ways they have not been schooled in that. And that's why we blithely talk of service delivery. Ask not what you can do for your country, but what your government can do for you.
Let's be if you don't mind, let's be a bit practical about it. Take a situation like last night. The president has to face the nation. What would you have said if you were him?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't have said it last night. I would have said it on Sunday when he had the whole nation listening, because people expected that, not merely a ramble on COVID, which is very important and which is killing people, but to come out very clearly and say that we are in this together. We need cooperation, we need understanding, and plead for a time to get things right. And then he must call the key people he truly entrusts, not the people he's jiving with because they come from this faction or the other, but people he really trusts. And there are enough smart, younger, brighter people that can be relied on, who have pulse of the people at their fingertips, not the rest of us who have grown fat in our own comfort. So ask people, engage with people. For crying out loud, we've got councillors, we've got members of legislatures, we've got parliamentarians. They should be with people instead of finding that the people they supposedly represent, actually they have lost complete touch with. The other thing is, stop stealing straight away. Stop lying to people. Stop this entitlement where the biggest thing now is people want to get into government or into a political party, and especially the ANC, because that root lies wealth. And change this terrible, demeaning education system. And there are people around who know that we are creating education for dependency, not for independent thinking and entrepreneurship. The lie that we'll create jobs when nowhere in the world are they just simply creating jobs because the economies of scale don't exist, technology has taken over. So enable people to find their place in the sun, but don't create walls for them and don't lie to them.
We've run out of time, but I'm going to ask you, both you, Dr. Lehohla and Mr. Mbeki, very, very briefly, in under a minute, to say, if he gets those young, energetic people that Dr. Cooper was talking about, what then does the president do with them and to what end? Dr. Lehohla?
I think there is a deception around planning and plans, and all the things that we have had, about 14 of them, over the last 27 years, which means a toy for the nation every 2 years, we actually have to get down to a plan. And what are the properties of a plan? A plan must have targets that delivers. And what is it that will convince South Africans that that plan will deliver? It must be modeled, it must be transparent, it must be debated, and it must define what an inclusive nation will be. It cannot be a plan that says we are planning, we are in the process. It is a plan with clear targets. It is a plan, not one with reconstruction and recovery, which says by 2030 South Africa will still have 30% unemployment. And it is hiding that target. It is not explicit on that target.
Okay.
It is not explicit, it is only explicit on the probable rate of growth, which is about 3.3%. We've been at 3.3%. That 3.3% never generated jobs. And you can then infer that 3.3%, that is the reconstruction and recovery plan, will generate even higher unemployment rates, given the state in which we are. The president must be able to say, I am demanding that we reduce this unemployment to this level. And anybody who gets through that door must show me and help me to reduce that unemployment. Not to applause in parliament these silly targets. And the parliamentarians applaud.
Quick last word from you, Mr. Mbeki.
What are these people? What are these applauding?
Mr. Mbeki?
Well, can I just correct what Sat said? You know, South Africa, we have the deepest mine in the world, which is 4 kilometers deep. Now, to build a mine that is 4 kilometers deep and work on it means that you have a unique expertise. I was going to say world class. It means you have unique expertise in the country. When we look at the South African banks, when I go to Europe or to England and I start looking for an ATM, I can never find it. But anywhere I go in South Africa, I look for an ATM and I find it. Every morning when I get up, I have a cup of tea with milk. there is a farmer in South Africa who is producing milk, who is producing eggs, who is feeding all of us. South Africa does not import its food. South Africa exports food. Why? Because we have people with the skills to run a successful country. Okay. The politicians don't listen to them.
Let's hope they do. And that's why we're going to leave it. Thanks to all of you for coming through this evening. Dr. Padil Hohla, Mweletse Mbeki, and Dr. Seth Scooper. After the break, we'll speak to State Security Minister Ayanda Dlodlo. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. We now speak to the minister responsible for state security, and that's Ayanda Dlodlo, following, of course, a briefing they had this morning where they were briefing journalists and, of course, the nation about what they were doing to deal with what we are seeing, the catastrophic disaster. Gangs of looters breaking doors, gates, tearing down walls, in trying to get their hands on stuff that does not belong to them. Minister, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. You repeated this mantra this morning during that briefing, that South Africa sleeps because intelligence works. And I'm sure a lot of business people, big and small, black and white, would disagree with you today, because their experience of the past couple of days has been a terrible, terrible one.
Well, I guess there would be those that would really not believe that there is anything that state security has done to avert some of the things that could have happened. But in some places where you would see that there has not been any looting, and we were able to curtail the march of people towards certain businesses, those who have received that kind of service from the police services would know that it was because of intelligence that the police were able to deploy effectively in those areas, and looting and burning of their properties was averted. So I said this with all humility, not to be arrogant, but it is fact that we do try our best. Over the last few months, we have put many systems in place, including the appointment and beefing up of people in provinces and also within the organization itself, to ensure that we have enough men and women on the ground to give us the best possible information, properly analyzed and packaged, for the police and for the defense force to work around as they do their deployment and interventions in the areas that they're deployed to.
You said that this morning, in fact, you underlined this point, that all you do is collate information and give it to the people you call clients, which in this instance would include police, and in other instances, all other government departments. But one got a sense that you were, in a way, washing your hands off this as intelligence or state security, something akin to what the Pontius Pilate of the Bible did. That we did what we could do; the rest depended on everyone else to take from there.
I'm not sure about the story of Pontius Pilate because I can't attest to that. But what I can tell you is I can never wash my hands off the whole system. It would be very foolhardy of me and really disingenuous and dishonest if I were to sit and wash my hands. But all I can do to allay the fears of the people of this country is that we did our job as state security. We collected information, we analyzed it, we packaged it for the client, and as I repeat, as you adequately reflect on what was said before, we gave it to the client. You would have listened to Minister Cele on the fact that intelligence was driving operations and prosecutions would need to come on. The police have got a mandate to enforce the law. All of us, the chain is big, and one cog of the chain can't disengage and say, there is nothing that I can do about it. That wasn't washing my hands of it. But all that I could have done was to give the information and continue to give the information. You know, Vuyo, there is so much work for state security to do between now and when things get back to normal. Because we would still have to inform the security cluster of what needs to happen in the aftermath of all of this. The plans that need to be put in place by the social development cluster of government. So there's still a lot of work for us to do. There is much more than just giving to the police. It is other departments that will package and analyze information for and provide the intelligence that would help them to plan better and be able to implement on their strategies.
Make us understand here. What happens when you have collated your information? Are you able to insist on your colleagues to do A, B, C? With what you would have given them? Or is it a question of, okay, this is what we've done, you decide, it's up to you to then take it from here? Because remember, often know stuff that other people don't know. Yes, your SAPS may have crime intelligence. Of course, questions have been asked, about their ability to execute, to do what they are supposed to do as well. But how does it work?
Well, I always make the example of Uyinene. I think you know the story about the brutal killing of Uyinene by a post office employee in Cape Town. The story is that SSA did give information about the man who is behind bars today for having killed Uyinene. We give that information. It is up to the departments to implement the recommendations that we make. Unfortunately, we have not looked at the law. Well, we are in the process of looking at the law so that we can be able to effect implementation and ensure that implementation does actually take place when we give recommendations. But as of now, we will give recommendations. We will help government to plan better. We will do all that we can, but that's just about all that we can do as state security. A lot of the time, the recommendations are heeded and taken into account, but some of the time, they are not. And that's the nature of intelligence the world over.
Now, there have been these rumors or allegations that there are people aligned to the former president, Jacob Zuma, who have been behind what we are seeing, the looting spree and the violence and the intimidation and everything that went with that. And some of them, it is alleged, are actually, or are at least former members of the state security apparatus. Can you confirm that and tell us how far you've gone with the investigations into that?
Well, the question was also put to me at the press conference that there is information that is making rounds about 5 people that are on a list who are the instigators of this whole thing. We are investigating that. We will be engaging with some of the individuals that are on the list. But you must also understand, some of the information might be true, some of it might not be true. All we can do is to ensure that we investigate thoroughly, hand over the information to the police to ensure that the police effect the arrest and the prosecution of the individuals. So as from where I sit right now, I cannot confidently say to you that information is accurate. We have not finished doing the investigations, as I say.
But from what you already have, or from what information that you have points to, what would you say is primarily responsible for what we are seeing in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng as things stand?
Well, it started off as a Free Jacob Zuma movement, which morphed into something much bigger than Jacob Zuma and the call to free him. What we are seeing today is a manifestation of issues around inequality and unemployment in our country. What we are seeing today is a disaffected youth. What we are seeing today are the remnants of our past. which come back to haunt us each time. And I'm not saying that there might not be a political hand in it, but as we look, because we do not want to be myopic as intelligence, as we look at the political hand that might be behind what started in KZN, we also need to acknowledge the socio-economic problems that have manifested in this country. And our addressing of these issues as a government really needs to speed up. We will come out of the situation tomorrow. There will be nothing more to loot tomorrow. The streets will still be filled with young people that are of employment age, that are not of pensionable age, that will still be there. How then are we going to resolve? Because if it didn't arise today, would it not have arisen tomorrow? We have seen the same happening in Swaziland. We have seen the same happening in the Arab countries, which was called the Arab Spring, when everything had been looted and everything had been burnt. The youth still remained on the streets.
I have a couple of tweets.
What we as intelligence would want to say, we should never discount the fact that it is beyond the politics. It is also socio-economic issues that are also at play. The fact that you see so many young people converged in malls, shopping centers and all of that at any one given time, in the numbers that they converge in, is an indication of a serious problem of unemployment in this country.
Okay, I have a couple of tweets here, Minister. One saying from Dubong, saying the job of the intelligence is to have information before everyone and intercept and danger, but our intelligence was found sitting on their laurels. Let me bring you the second one so I can respond to both. The intelligence has already failed. Let's not let the president and military fail also. You cannot prioritize guarding empty government buildings and not move in to stop violent looters who burn buildings with people inside. Protect people, not buildings. Quick response, Minister?
You know, if you listened to Minister Gcele, you would realize that at no point did he say we did not have information. And that information was provided. But were there enough police and soldiers on the ground? The answer is no. There were issues of logistics as well that were involved in all of this. And again, I don't want to be seen as throwing Minister Gcele under the bus, because this is a collaborative effort. We were not caught sitting on our laurels. Information had been flowing. I've given figures on what it is that we've given. I've given figures on what it is that we have averted. The list is not exhaustive. So I do not want to accept what is being said that we were sitting on our laurels. We were not.
Okay.
We lost in certain instances. We didn't have the correct information in certain instances, but that is the nature of intelligence.
Very, very quickly, Minister, can you update us on the Robert McBride situation?
Well, I knew that question would be coming, but unfortunately, I cannot speak on that one currently. We will be able to give information as and when the processes begin. But right now, I really am not at liberty to talk about that.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for coming through this evening, the Minister of State Security, Ayanda Ndlovu. And that's all we had for you this evening. Do join us again tomorrow evening. From me and the Watchdog team, it's a good night.